Once upon a time, in the quiet town of Aguda, lived a woman who did something that no one else had ever done. Her name was Abeni, and she changed her baby's name every single day. On Monday, the baby was Ayomi. By Tuesday, she became Ola. On Wednesday, she was Moremi. And by Thursday, Abeni was calling her Adesua. No one knew why she did what she did. Not even her husband Kola, who thought that something was definitely wrong with his wife. The neighbors whispered amongst themselves, wondering if the child was cursed or worse still, born by a lunatic mother. 7 names in 7 days was so ridiculous. It became the talk of the town as everyone had something to say. Abeni must be sick in the head, oh. One of them said, whilst the other believed that the child was not hers. How can a woman be so indecisive on the name to give to her child? Does she know what this will do to the child when she grows up? They said amongst themselves, shrugging as Abeni walked past them with her baby strapped to her back. She knew they were talking about her, but Abeni did not care. She went about her business, ignoring all their whispers and gossip. Her husband Kola could no longer take the embarrassment. You must stop this nonsense, Abeni, he snapped. How can our daughter have a different name every day? What do people think? What will she even call herself when she grows? He asked Abeni, who informed him that time would tell. Our daughter will know who she is when the time is right, she replied as she folded her baby blanket on the bed. Kola was still not convinced with the answer. Stop hiding behind mystery and tell me what is going on, he demanded, but Abeni remained silent. Kola was so frustrated and angry. He stormed out of the house. He could not understand why his wife Abeni was behaving like a mad woman. As he walked out angrily, his phone rang and his mother asked why he sounded so angry. Mama, is it not Abeni? She has started again, changing the baby's name every single day. Today, she called her Adesua. Yesterday it was Moremi. Who knows what foolishness she will say tomorrow? Mama Kola hissed and began to talk. I warned you, Kola. I told you that girl is not normal. All this her quiet behavior and mysterious talk. What kind of mother changes her child's name like rapper? She asked Kola, who rubbed his forehead in frustration. Mama, I'm tired. People are laughing at me and it's not even funny. Then do something about it fast. Don't bring shame to me and your father by staying with that witch of a woman. Make sure you leave her now before she does something terrible to you, she said to her son Kola, who stood there deep in thought. That night, Kola packed up his bags and left, leaving Abeni alone with their daughter. Abeni was so heartbroken. She knew this was going to happen, seeing that Kola's mother never liked her from the beginning. She loved Kola so much and believed that he would stand beside her, even if the world decided to mock them. But love, she had come to realize, was not always enough. Not when family pressure and shame knocked too loud at the door. Abeni looked down at her daughter as tears began to pour down her eyes. She never imagined that her daughter would one day grow up without a father, but as fate would have it, she was now alone. She took care of her daughter, ignoring all the terrible things that people said and did to them. At a point, no one associated with them, and Abeni lived alone with her daughter, who began to grow in the cold and hostile village. A few years later, when she turned 4, her mother tried to enroll her in a nearby school, but the school rejected the application. She has no legal name, the headmistress said sharply as Abeni looked up at her. How can we register a child whose name changes every day? What will we write on her file? Today Ayomi, tomorrow Adesua. This is not a joke, madam. Abeni pleaded, tried to explain that her daughter was special, that there was a reason for everything, but no one listened. She was sent away from the school gates, holding her confused daughter, who could not help but ask why they were turned away. Why are they angry, Mama? Did I do something wrong? The little girl asked innocently, as Abeni forced a smile and said to her, You didn't do anything wrong, my daughter. They just don't understand, she said as they both walked home. However, the rejection did not stop Abeni. She began to teach her daughter at home letters, numbers, stories. Every day was a new lesson, and as the girl grew, so did her strength. She learned quickly and spoke eloquently, far better than most children her age. By the time she was 6, she could read fluently and even began to help her mother with the accounting from their small stall in the market. Still, people whispered and pointed fingers at her in mockery. They called her the name changing witch, and parents warned their children to stay away from her. Abeni could not help but see how hot her daughter was to see the other children playing together. She watched as her daughter sat by the window alone, watching as the other children laughed and played. So Abeni decided to do something about it. She made her daughter the most beautiful doll, crafted from colorful materials. Abeni handed the doll over to her daughter, who could not hide her excitement. For the first time in years, Abeni could see how her daughter's face lit up at the sight of the doll. She told her daughter to name the doll, and her daughter, without thinking twice, named it Anjola, which meant bringer of joy. From that day on, the little girl carried Anjola everywhere. She spoke to her, played with her, and taught her all the things her mother had taught her. To anyone watching, it might have seemed odd, another sign that something wasn't right with the name-changing girl. But to Abeni's daughter, Angela was a friend when no one else cared to be. As the years went by, Abeni's daughter grew into an extremely beautiful young woman. She was now 18 and had no friends except Angela, the doll her mother made for her so many years ago. One day, Abeni's daughter went to the stream to fetch some water. As she was about carrying the pot of water on her head, she heard a loud scream coming from the forest. She followed the cry and met a pregnant woman who seemed to be in labor. She had just been bitten by a ravenous snake and the poison was fast spreading. Abeni's daughter quickly found a cloth and tied it around the woman's leg to stop the poison from spreading. Before she knew what was happening, the woman pushed out a baby in front of her eyes. She sat there confused as the woman let out her last breath. Abeni's daughter held the newborn baby in her hands as she wondered what she was going to do. She looked around and found the strange woman's bag lying next to her lifeless body. So she took it home and met her mother, who asked her where the baby had come from. Abeni stood there and listened as her daughter explained everything that happened to her, how she had followed the scream, helped the woman in labor, and watched her die right there in the forest. She didn't say anything, Mama. She didn't tell me her name. She just left her baby behind, and I didn't know what to do. Abeni took the baby from her daughter's arms, her experienced arms cradling the newborn with tenderness. She looked down at the infant's face, her eyes softening with a mix of sorrow and awe. Then she turned to her daughter and said, "We must find the child's family. The baby deserves to grow up knowing where she comes from." Her daughter nodded and handed over the bag the woman had left behind. Abeni opened it carefully, hoping for a clue. At the bottom of the worn-out bag, beneath a crumpled scarf and an old wrapper, she found a photograph. It was a picture of a man who they had never seen before, and Abeni wondered how they could find him. She searched the bag thoroughly, but found nothing that could be of help. No name, no address, nothing, and Abeni had no idea how she would find him. She knew the villagers would be of no help, seeing how they avoided them like a plague. So Abeni decided to keep the baby in their home until they found the man whose face was in the picture. Days turned into weeks, but still there was no sign of the man in the photograph. Abeni often stared at the picture, hoping that something, anything would stir her memory or lead her to someone who knew him. But Aguda was a town where people minded their business, and Abeni's family had long been treated as outcasts. No one dared to speak to them, let alone help them. So Abeni and her daughter continued to care for the child. One day, Abeni decided that it was high time that the baby got a name. She told her daughter to pick a name for the baby, and without wasting any time, her daughter picked the name Arike. From the moment that she said the name Arike, Abeni's daughter felt a wave of happiness that she could not explain. It was as though the baby whispered the name in her ears, and the connection she felt with the baby in that moment was so deep and powerful. Her mother, Benny, also noticed the connection. She could see the joy in her daughter's eyes, a stillness that hadn't been there before. Abeni was so grateful for the baby. At last, her daughter could have a friend who, although small, would not judge her or mock her the way the villagers had done all her life. For the first time in years, their house felt full. It was no longer just the two of them. It was now a home filled with soft baby cries, innocent giggles, and a kind of peace that made Abeni silently thank the heavens. Whilst Abeni rejoiced, her neighbors wondered where the baby had come from. "I told you she's a witch," one of the neighbors said, revealing that she overheard some chants in Abeni's house the night before. "We can't live next to a witch. It's either she lives with her witch daughter or we drive her out ourselves." That was how the whisper became a meeting, and the meeting soon became a mob. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside Abeni's compound, their faces filled with suspicion, fear, and anger. Some carried sticks, whilst others held their Bibles and some bottles of anointing oil. They banged on her door repeatedly as Abeni walked out of the house slowly, with her daughter by her side. She was holding baby Arike in her hands, and the villagers all opened their mouths in shock to see a baby in her arms. She looked the crowd in the eye, and for the first time in years she did not flinch. "What have I done?" Abeni asked, her voice calm but firm. "Which one of you came to me with kindness? Which one offered me friendship when my husband left? You laughed. When I taught my child alone, you mocked. And now, because I took in a child from the bushes, I am a witch?" Someone in the crowd replied her question, asking where the baby had come from and where her mother was. Abeni explained how her daughter came across the baby, but the villagers found it hard to believe. They requested to see where the baby's mother had died, and Abeni, alongside her daughter, took them to the forest where she was last seen. When they arrived at the scene, the strange woman's body was gone. All that remained were scattered leaves and a torn headscarf stained with dried blood. "Lies!" one of the villagers shouted. "She buried the woman herself after using her for rituals." "I told you!" another yelled angrily, pointing her accusing finger at Abeni. "This is why she changed her daughter's name every day to practice her witchcraft." The angry mob chased them out of the village as Abeni ran off with her daughter and the newborn baby. They ran until their legs could not carry them anymore. Night fell over the dusty road as Abeni, breathless and trembling, clutched Arike tightly to her chest, while her daughter clung to her side barefoot and weeping. They had no food, no belongings, and nowhere to go. In desperation, Abeni remembered one place, her husband's mother's house, tucked in the neighboring village of Eketu. She hadn't stepped her foot there since her wedding, but with nowhere else to run, she decided to go. Maybe, she whispered to her daughter, maybe she'll have mercy. They arrived in the dead of the night, tired, hungry, and covered in dust. Abeni knocked gently on the rusted gate, her voice weak as she called out, "Mama Kola, please, it's Abeni." A light flickered inside, and moments later, Kola's mother opened up the door and caught sight of them. "You witch," she said, her eyes fixated on Abeni. "What are you doing in my home?" "Mama, please," Abeni begged. "They chased us. They said I killed someone. I have nowhere else to go." Mama Kola's eyes fell on the baby, her face turned to disgust. "Whose bastard child is that? Another one you've bewitched? You bring this cursed child and your mad daughter here to pollute my home?" Abeni's daughter gasped, holding on tighter to her. "Mama, please," Abeni said again, her knees buckling as she fell to the ground. "Just one night, I beg you, Mama." But the old woman spat on the floor beside her. "If you don't leave now, I'll call the town boys and tell them the same thing those villagers said, that you're a witch who steals children. In fact, I should have stopped Kola from marrying you, but no, he said you are quiet and respectful. Now see the disgrace you've brought to us." Abeni stood slowly, her face pale as her hands began to shake. "Don't ever come near my house again," Mama Kola warned, pointing towards the road. "You and that daughter of yours whose name changes like a chameleon. You can all die for all I care, she said as she banged her door to her face, leaving them all alone in the dark. Abeni stood frozen for a moment as the sound of the slammed door echoed in her ears. Her daughter held her wrapper, shivering as the night wind blew gently. Baby Arike whimpered faintly in her arms, too young to understand the world that had already turned its back on her. Abeni looked up at the sky, the stars watching silently as tears filled her eyes, but still she refused to let them fall. Not again. She had cried enough tears to fill the village river. Now, all she had was survival. "We'll keep walking," she said to her daughter, who asked where they were going. "I don't know yet, my daughter, but wherever it is, I know that it will surely be better than here." And so they began to walk under the cover of night. They walked for hours and came across an empty hut by the side of the forest. Abeni decided to lay low in the hut. She could see how exhausted her daughter was, and the baby had already fallen asleep in her arms. Inside the hut, there was nothing but dry leaves, broken wooden planks, and dust. But to Abeni it felt like a palace, because for the first time in days they were finally safe. She laid Arike down and watched her daughter coil up beside the baby, wrapping her hands protectively around her. Abeni leaned against the wall, whispering a soft prayer, her eyes finally closing as her body gave in to her exhaustion. They all slept for hours, and when morning finally came, Abeni realized that her daughter was nowhere to be found. "Adetutu," she called out desperately as she paused, realizing that she hadn't given her daughter a name for that day. Adetutu was the name that she bore the previous day, and Abeni knew better than to call her that. She stepped out of the hut and looked around, but her daughter was nowhere to be found. Filled with so much panic, Abeni began to walk around the village, searching for her daughter. Baby Arike was strapped to her back as she walked down the road of the village, asking everyone that she came across if they had seen her daughter, but no one knew who she was talking about. All they asked for was her daughter's name, and Arike had no answer to the question, for her daughter was nameless. Abeni walked around aimlessly as tears began to pour down her eyes. This was the first time that she was not naming her daughter, and Arike could not bear the thought of anything bad happening to her. She decided to return back to the hut, hoping that her daughter would have returned. However, when she arrived at the hut, she met an old woman sitting outside the hut. Abeni apologized to the old woman for sleeping in her hut. "I didn't know someone lived here. We found it empty and decided to spend the night," she said to the woman, who asked why she looked so sad. Abeni explained everything to her, how they were accused of being witches and sent away from their village, and how her daughter was now missing. Abeni pleaded with the old woman to allow her stay in the hut till her daughter returns. "My daughter knows nowhere in the village. Please let me stay here till she returns," she pleaded with the old woman, who agreed for her to stay. "You can stay for as long as you want," the old woman said to Abeni, who could not hide her gratitude. Baby Arike, however, began to cry at the top of her lungs. Abeni put her down from her back, wondering what she would give to her to eat. The old woman pointed at a pot in the distance. "There's some milk in the pot. Why don't you heat it up and give to the baby to drink?" she said to Abeni, who thanked her immensely and rushed off to heat up the milk. Baby Arike wailed uncontrollably as she lay on the mat, her tiny fists clenched as her face soaked in tears. The old woman hummed a lullaby, her voice low and sweet, hoping to soothe the child, but Arike cried even louder, her body twisting with distress as Abeni watched with growing concern. She had never seen Arike cry like that before, not even once, and seeing her do so made her believe that something was wrong. Just as she was about lifting Arike from the mat, she felt a sharp pain shoot through her spine. Her vision blurred and her knees buckled beneath her. Abeni crashed to the ground beside Arike, who was still crying uncontrollably. She tried to speak, but her tongue felt so heavy. Everything around her began to spin. Her eyes met that of the old woman, and for a brief moment, Abeni saw something that chilled her soul. The old woman smiled, A slow, wicked smile before she began to speak. "You shouldn't have come here, Benny," she said, her voice no longer soft, but deep and laced with venom. "You brought her to me, the one I've searched for all these months." Abeni's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She watched helplessly as the old woman walked to where the baby lay, and with a wicked smile, she lifted Arike from the mat. "So this is the child," she whispered darkly, "the cursed princess that they thought I wouldn't find." Years ago, this old woman had killed the reigning king and seized control of the royal palace. She planned to place her son on the throne, but when she discovered that the king's wife was pregnant, she panicked. The child was the true heir, so she hunted the queen down, but the queen had disappeared, hidden by prayers. All efforts to find the queen proved abortive, as the old woman's evil power was no match to that of the queen. However, when the queen died in the forest, the old woman for the first time could see the baby through her dark mirror. However, there was a problem. She could not trace the child directly because another girl had taken her, and that girl had no fixed name. Thousands of names confused the spirit, and the path was never clear. So the evil woman followed her trail, one day at a time, but Abeni and her daughter were always ahead of her no matter what she did. Now, the baby was in her hand, and Abeni was now under the spell of the evil woman who paralyzed her entire body with her evil power. Abeni remembered the dream she had when she was pregnant for her daughter. She saw herself holding a young woman in her arms and crying. In the dream, Abeni knew that the grown-up woman was her daughter, even if she was still pregnant for her at the time. The girl was dead in her arms, and a strange woman appeared to her in the dream, warning her not to name her child. She told Abeni to give her daughter a name a day until the one who has been named is set free. The woman warned that if she failed to do so, her daughter would die a miserable death as she had seen in the dream. Abeni woke up from her dream terrified. She decided to do as the woman instructed and gave her daughter a new name every day. Abeni at the time did not understand her dream, but now as she lay there, she began to understand what was happening. For the first time since her daughter was born, she failed to give her a name, leaving room for the evil woman to find them. Abeni lay there helpless as she felt her heart race. She tried to pray, but her tongue still felt like stone as she watched the woman drop Arike on the table as she held up a dagger. Her eyes filled with evil as she raised the dagger above her head and began to speak. This child would never see her throne. She would die before her name can be known, she said as the door of the hut burst open. It was Abeni's daughter, panting, barefoot and fierce-eyed, and behind her stood a tall man with the same face as the one in the photograph from the dead woman's bag. He was the queen's only brother, who everyone thought was dead. The evil woman's son sent men to attack him in the forest a few years ago. They beat him to stupor and buried him in a shallow grave in the forest. What they did not know was that someone saw all that they did in the forest and rushed to save him. For all these years, he disguised himself and lived in plain sight. Then one day, after the king died mysteriously, he heard that his sister the queen had run away. He began to search everywhere for her and found her dead body in the forest hours after she had passed. He noticed that she had given birth to the baby, but had no idea where the baby could be. He then decided to settle in the village where his sister was found dead. He roamed the village, silently searching for the baby. When he heard the story of the girl whose mother changed her name daily, he heard that the woman now had a strange baby in her home, and the people wondered how they got the baby. He watched from a distance as the people accused Abeni of being a witch, and Abeni revealed to them that her daughter helped a pregnant woman who died in the forest. It was then that he confirmed that the child was his niece. He secretly followed them out of their village as he moved from village to village, looking for where to settle. He kept his distance, watching as they wandered the streets that night and arrived the strange hut by the side of the forest. That night, as Abeni's daughter woke up to ease herself in the bush, she saw him standing outside the hut. That was how he convinced her to follow him if she ever wanted to know the truth And Abeni's daughter, recognizing his face from the photograph, followed him, where he told her all that happened to his family and the truth about the baby who turned out to be the princess. The old woman screamed in anger when she saw him standing there. "You again," she barked. "Why don't you stay buried?" "Because truth doesn't lie," the man replied, stepping forward, "and neither will my niece." Before the old woman could utter another word, the queen's brother grabbed her hand from behind and lunged the knife into her own abdomen. The old woman fell to the floor, holding her stomach as she fought for her life. As the evil woman took her final breath, the hut fell into a strange silence. Baby Arike stopped crying instantly as Abeni sat up and rushed to hug her daughter. "I'm happy you are okay," she said to her daughter, who she finally gave a name for the very last time. Abeni looked deep into her daughter's eyes, her voice trembling with emotion as she whispered, "You are no longer nameless, my child. Your name is Iretioluwa." The name rolled over her lips like a gentle breeze. It meant hope of God, and it carried the weight of every tear, every insult, every sacrifice they had endured. Her daughter's eyes filled with tears as she told her mother how much she loved the name. The queen's brother then stepped forward, holding baby Arike gently in his arms. "We must go, for the kingdom awaits his true heir." Iretioluwa smiled to her mother as they followed the queen's brother Dotun back to the palace. Immediately they arrived, the people opened their eyes in shock to see Dotun. He stood in their midst and announced to the people that the lost princess had been found. Everywhere broke out in jubilation as the evil woman's son, who was scheming to take over the throne, heard that the princess had been found. The news of his mother's death reached his ears and he tried to escape when the people surrounded him and locked him up in the palace prison. Abeni and her daughter were welcomed like queens as Dotun stood before the royal court and declared, "This woman Abeni and her daughter Iretioluwa have preserved the crown that evil tried so hard to destroy. They have suffered for protecting a truth that they never even knew. From this day forward, they shall rule beside me on behalf of Princess Arike until the day that she comes of age to take her rightful place." The whole palace erupted in jubilation as the people bowed before them in reverence. Back in Aguda, the news spread like wildfire, and the people, who once called Abeni mad and possessed, gathered in shame. Even Mama Kola and her son Kola could not believe what they were hearing. They began to regret how badly they treated Abeni, seeing how life had rewarded her for her diligence. As for little Arike, she thrived under their care, playful, intelligent, and strong-willed, as they prepared her for the day that she would sit on the throne, the day a once lost princess would rise to become the greatest queen the kingdom had ever seen. The lesson to be learned from this story is that sometimes what the world mocks today is what destiny honors tomorrow. People may misunderstand your silence, your choices, or your struggle, but as long as your heart is pure and your intentions are guided by love, truth will always find its voice in the end. Abeni was ridiculed, abandoned, and called mad. Yet her patience, sacrifice, and faith protected not only her daughter but a kingdom. This tale teaches us never to judge what we do not understand, and to remember that every name, every pain, and every step in our journey may be leading us to something far greater than we can imagine. I hope you enjoyed the story.